Good morning. We're going to go ahead and get started now. Welcome, everyone. For those who will be watching this on our YouTube channel later, I'm Julie Aubry, and I co-chair the Quality Council with Stacy Wenzel, and we'll be presenting today. And welcome, because this is session 6. So this is our final training session of the Learning Co-op before we have our share out in December, and we're all looking forward to that. And Stacy will talk to you more about that in a little bit. Before we get going, I want to let you know of an email that's going to be coming out in the next couple of weeks, probably through Monday Mail. And a couple times per year, Quality Council sends out an email asking if there is interest to sit on the Quality Council as a rotational member. So it is a 6-month term, and it exposes you to Quality Council and all the things that we do. So if you've been really engaged in this and you want to learn more, there will be an email coming out, and you'll want to go through your supervisor and or your division director. And we will be making selections for new rotational members in December, and the term will be from January through June of 2015. So that's coming up, just to let you know. So we are moving into session 6, the control phase. And I do want to clarify that it is the control phase where we are actually transferring some of the control of the project from the project teams as they are actually getting implemented. So this is not to be confused with the seize controlling phase. So I'm thinking there may have been some people in the room that might have maybe misread this, and so I just wanted to clarify what I'm meaning by controlling or control freak. So if you're not sure if maybe you have a little bit of that in you, you can either ask the person next to you, because I'm sure they'll tell you, or you can, I did look on Google, and I found a couple of little things that might give you a little tip. If this hits home with you, maybe you've got a little control freak in you. Or if one of these, whoops, down here. Well, now it's not going. I'll do this. I know. Julie.
Okay, now down arrow.
Or if one of these pictures bothers you.
No, really, she came into my office and was like, "Don't these bother you?"
which leads to the next slide, obviously. Okay, so that's just a little setting the stage, get us in the right mood. I'll turn it over to Stacy for the moment. This whole area of the room could have answered that for me. We know that. But I'm just going to be right by, because I'm going to do that.
Julie's a nut, not a freak.
There we go.
Likeable. All right. So here we go. Let me turn this on. Last session before share out, we're going to provide a little bit of preparation for the share out, because we do expect you all to participate in that. Very low key, informal, so we'll review that towards the end. But this is the last technical phase of the DMAIC method, which is what we've been leading you through: define, measure, analyze, improve, control. Depending on whether you got QI or QP project going on, it's the same basic steps. So the final phase, we understand that not all of you are in that phase. It's okay if your project is still in. Hopefully you've all moved past define. Is anybody still in the define phase? It's okay if you are. Okay. But we do want to move you forward. So, but if you're still kind of towards the beginning, no problem. It's totally fine. We'll help you move on, even though the learning co-op's coming to a close. So today we are going to do some just-in-time tools. I'm going to throw up really briefly some very simple, they are tools, but they should be pretty intuitive. So we're going to be moving quickly through some of them. Julie's going to help us with some more instruction on process mapping, so flow charting. And then we're going to do a little force field analysis exercise that should be kind of fun. And then review preparation for the share out. So swear words today: control, change, force field analysis. So for how many people is control a swear word? Or is it just a blissful, nice word? Okay. What about change? Change can be a swear word for most of us at times. Okay, so this again is where we're at. We've been through all these phases so far, from diagnosing what we wanted to do through the last phase of improve and verifying our improvements. So we're moving on to that final phase. There's 2 key points to this phase that I want to communicate, and I've bolded those words. So if you can just remember those 2 words. What's the whole point of control? It's transition and then monitoring. So what you're doing, if you've been working in a team, and some of you might have been working solely on your project if it's a smaller process that you're working on that just involves you. But if you have a team, ultimately you have to transition from that define project status to daily operations, how the process is going to be managed day in, day out, and by whom moving forward. So transition is one of the key words for this phase. The other key word is monitor. You are not doing quality improvement if you do not establish the means to monitor the process that you've worked on moving forward. You have to establish those means. That means measuring it. So establishing the way to measure whether or not all the hard work that you did is actually doing what it's supposed to do. So you want to use information to monitor the performance of that. We're not going to go in great detail. There are tools to help that, and if you're interested, see me and the coaches afterwards if you need more instruction on some of these. So some of these tools we're just providing an introduction. Okay, here's the basic steps of the control phase. I like linear steps, so we presented it this way. So first thing you're going to do is establish the means to monitor your performance over time. The tools that you can use there is a process map, detailed process map, protocols, procedures also work there, and a control plan. From there, you're going to also work on developing all the support materials that you need to transition to ongoing daily maintenance. So think about what you need related to training of staff. You've just worked to either design a new process or improve it. You have to expect that people are going to have questions that need to answer, and you need to be prepared to prepare your staff to take this on moving forward. There has to be some element of training, formal or informal. An implementation plan, that's just an action plan. So some people might use something as complicated as a Gantt chart, which is a great tool. Last year in a project management class, we introduced something called a Kanban board. That's the same thing. It's really a way to track the action items to move your project through implementation. So there's different tools for that. And then communication plan. And we're going to talk a little bit more about communication, but especially if your project is bigger in scope, a little bit more risky, there's never too much communication that you can do. So the more thought you put into communicating, it's only going to help the change process. So you're changing something. You're changing how a process is being done, if it's an improvement, or you're changing something, a brand new service that you're introducing. But there's some sort of change there, and communication is going to help you manage that change process. You're going to prepare staff for implementation, do the training, provide the instruction, the protocols, the materials. Ultimately, you're going to launch that implementation and monitor, because things might surface. Hopefully you've done maybe a little pilot test before you've launched your new and improved process or your new service full scale. But when you go to full-on implementation, there's going to be things that come up, and so you really want to be monitoring that, capturing issues as they arise, and figuring out the means to address those. Ultimately, you're going to be done with this, and then you're going to be into a monitoring phase. If upon implementation, you've recognized some serious problems in the service that you've designed, or an improvement is not working, then you're going to immediately re-enter that improvement cycle and start all over. If it seems to be working, then you're going to just move on to status quo, daily operations, which is still going to be monitoring that process, looking at your measurements over time, logic model, at least annually. A lot of us are familiar with that process and how we look at our services annually to identify opportunities for improvement. Ultimately, anytime you're completing a project, you want to share out and celebrate. It's a lot of work. How many think it's a lot of work? Yeah, pretty much everyone. It's a big deal, and hopefully you've learned a lot, and we need to share that learning with one another, which is the December co-op, and a little bit of a celebratory session around that. So that's really important. So this leads us to the first objective. So a primary purpose of the control phase, again, is to build the means to monitor and improve your process. You can't neglect doing this, otherwise What's going to happen to your process over time if you haven't established these means? If nobody's paying attention to it, you're gonna have things go wrong over time, and you're gonna just build in, let inefficiencies continue to build in your process. So the objective here is to be able to state at least 2 tools. So state, not necessarily use, but be aware of 2 tools that can help you in the control phase after your project's done. So what happens, I'm going to show you a little video. This is kind of a neat video, and we're going to talk a little bit about this.
Stop. Pay attention. I'm going to give you a list of tasks one at a time. Simply follow my instructions, starting each new task as I say it. Just keep going until I tell you to start a new one. Got it? Here we go. Clap your hands. Count out loud to 10. Put your hands on your head. Cluck like a chicken. Besides feeling a little silly right now, you probably had no problem following those directions. What was the third thing I asked you to do? Think back. Put your hands on your head. Aha, remember now?
In case you didn't get that right, we're going to give you another chance and also see how well these people handle stress. It will be a different set of instructions, so you can play along again and try to remember the tasks in order.
Ready, set, go. Count backwards from 10.
10, 9, 9, 7,
Act like a monkey. Wave your hands above your head. Recite the alphabet.
A, B, C.
Snap your fingers. Howl like a wolf. Stamp your feet. Say the word brain 3 times fast.
Brain, brain, brain.
Amazing job, guys. One question for you. What was the 4th thing I asked you to do?
Howl like a wolf.
No. Okay, you go first.
Say brain, brain, brain 3 times.
Not quite, but close.
Your hands over your head.
No, actually.
What about you? Do you remember the 4th task? There were only 8 to remember. So why do you think your brain is unable to recall the 4th one, even though we told you the 2nd time to remember the tasks in order?
It was actually recite the alphabet.
By giving you rapid-fire instructions, we caused your brain to enter a stress state, releasing hormones that actually decrease your short-term memory. In fact, the chronic release of stress hormones can impair cells in the part of your brain designed for learning and memory. Your brain, in trying to keep you safe from harm, is actually harming you.
Okay, so let's talk about that a little bit. What can we learn from that video? Huh? Don't multitask, okay? So thinking about what we're talking about establishing the means to control your process moving forward. Any other thoughts on that?
Can't learn when you're stressed.
Right.
Try to prevent stress.
Limit the number of tasks. These are all valid things, right? How many people experience stress at some point in their work? Okay, every single one of us. So say you're the manager of whatever process that you're working on, and you ask your staff to actually do this procedure, and you gave them the verbal order, do it this way, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but you didn't establish any written documentation for that. And then by the next week, they can't remember step 2 or 3. So you've just seen how easy it is on basic instructions. So is it fair to expect staff or anybody, yourselves, to be able to follow an established procedure if you don't have any reference to it? It's just human nature. It's our brain and our chemistry. And top it off with stress in our world. We all have it. We can't do our jobs. That's why we talk about quality improvement is about process. It's not about people. It's not people that make the errors. It's the processes that aren't established well to support them in that job. So the whole point is before you leave a project, you must establish the written process. So that goes back to the very first slide. If you can't actually write out the process, then you don't have one. You have to write it out. So that leads us into flow charting, and then there's another tool called control charts that help with that. Is that making sense? Okay. So, two of the tools, process map, control plan. If you do nothing else, please try to do these two things. Establish, document that process, and identify some ways to measure it. That's really what this means.
So the benefit, really, well, there are multiple benefits of process mapping, or AKA flowcharts. And flowchart, one of the things that in the memory jogger it says about it is that it's picturing the process. And for a lot of people who are real visual, yep, you could just write everything down in a procedure. But if you can visually just see it, it helps you immensely, not only just to see the process and see the steps, but when they're written down, then you can really hone in on unnecessary loops or unnecessary steps, some areas that are really complicated that maybe you need to streamline just because it's that visual reference. So how many are really adept and have used flowcharts quite a bit? We've used them, for example, in training some of our partners on a new process. We've used them in some of our procedures as a decision tree when trying to determine enforcement actions. Do people use them? Yes? Okay. Give me the fist of 5 again as far as just comfort, basic comfort level with flowcharts. Okay, 5s, 4s, 3s. Okay, so let's go through, and we can probably go through pretty quickly on the high-level flowcharts because there are multiple levels of flowcharts. The high level, that's just the basic steps, and if you remember in the design phase, when we were identifying the problem that we were going to work on, we identified the beginning, and we had a couple of steps, and then the end. So we've all done that. Really basic, not a lot of detail. And if you want, though, to go to more detail and maybe assign some responsibility, there are mid-level flowcharts, and we're going to talk about a matrix or a swim lane, and I'll show you an example of that. And then, of course, you can go very detailed, every step, every decision in the entire process. And when I was Googling and looking for info about flowcharts, one site said that there are about 100 symbols that you can use for flowcharts, so you can get pretty detailed. I wouldn't want to see that one. So this is a slide, if you recall, that we use. It's a copy of the slide from the design phase. And with the high-level flowchart, again, we have the start and the stop of the process. Again, we've just got primary objectives, just our primary basic steps. And typically, you don't have very many steps, so 4 to 7 steps, and it's more conceptual. Everybody's recalling that slide? Okay. So just as an example, this is the process that we use for school plan review. So we've got just 4 steps. We've got the beginning, school submits construction documents, then we review them, and then we approve them, and then we've got the building department issuing a building permit to the school. Process just goes left to right across the page, not very many steps. And I want you to notice, because we'll come back to this, we have 3 different entities involved with this. And we've got the schools, and I color-coded it, so schools in red, and then health district in, looks kind of purplish up there, and then building department in green. So just that's for reference, we'll get back to that. But what if you want to add more detail to this? And what if what you really want to do is be able to see a lot more clearly who's responsible for what in the process? We'd go to the matrix or the swim lane. So what's great about this is that each entity, each department, each person in your flowchart has their own column or lane. And that's going to show what steps that they are responsible for. And you can add more detail. It's made for a little bit more detail. And so not only are you going left to right for your entire process, your overall process, but you're going to travel down your page in the swim lane for those particular entities as they're responsible for those steps. And let me show you. So again, here's our process, our plan review process. So again, we're starting with the school, but we've broken it out. Now they're developing the construction project and they're submitting it to us. Then the next step in the flow, it goes across and into our swim lane, because we're going to review the plans, then we're going to approve them, and then we notify the building department. So we're going into their swim lane, and the building department then receives our approval. They do their paperwork and they issue the building permit. So pretty clear, actually pretty easy and real visual. Questions about that? Okay, 2 easy ones. Now, we're going to up the ante a little bit. Detailed flowchart. Sometimes you really need to go detail. And the beauty is that in the detail, you can see every single step. You can see every decision that's made. You can insert in your flowchart documents, databases. You can put those in so you see where they're coming into play. And what you're doing here, you're not showing how the process should be, but you are documenting the reality of the process, meaning what's actually happening in the process. And so by doing that, if you've built in some inefficiencies, which you don't want to do that because you're at the end of your improvement project, and so you want to make sure you're real streamlined. But if you have built in some inefficiencies or some loops or some dead-end steps that go nowhere, or handing off back and forth that you can streamline, very visual, you're going to be able to see that. So the detailed flowcharts are good for several phases in the quality improvement or quality planning projects, and specifically for the phase that we're in the control phase. A little bit of cons, yes, it's time-consuming to do it right. And you need to make sure that you're doing it right in order to get everybody on the same page. And if you don't follow a few little rules, they can be hard to follow. So I'll show you an example, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But let's get to the symbols, because if you're going into detail, and I'm not going to show you 100 symbols, these are some of the real common symbols that you would use in a more detailed flowchart. So we're going to go counterclockwise, and we're going to start in the upper left-hand corner with the symbols that we're familiar using. So the royal blue color, the start and the stop, the oval, we're familiar with that. You may also see it as it looks like a little pill. Some flowcharts will use that. So those are the start and stop, the beginning and the end of your process. What Stacy likes to call your bread and butter, if we're moving down, that's the step or the action. So as you're going across, specifically with the high-level flowcharts, the medium level, for each step, you're going to write that in a square, and then you're connecting it with arrows. But what if your process can go 2 different ways? Do you buy the red one? Yes? No. So then you turn your square into a diamond, and that's what's called a decision step. And I'll show you an example of that. So when your process can go a couple different ways, you're using that decision. And a tip on that, because if you've got a really complex flowchart with a lot of steps, if you've got a lot of decisions in there, it makes it easier to see if all your yeses are going one way and all your nos are going another way. Just visually, it makes it flow better. Okay, so moving along across the bottom, if your flow chart includes a database or a document, we've got symbols for those. So if you're filing a report, then maybe you want to use that document symbol. You don't want to have a flowchart that is so gigantic and you're trying to squeeze it on a page. That's not going to make it any easier to see. In fact, it's going to be more confusing. So the circle is a go-to or a connector. So it's just like the to be continued marker. So you would have an arrow going to the go-to, and then the next page you would pick it up again at that circle. So that's how you bridge between pages. If you have some steps that are really highly variable or maybe unclear, you need to define them some more, think gray, cloudy, and so you draw a cloud there. And those might be some that you want to come back to, but that's how I remember it. Unclear, gray, cloudy. And then you've got the weight. And that looks like a D, red, delay. So if you're flowcharting, remember we've used an example way back when where we were flowcharting how someone gets up in the morning. So alarm goes off. Next step, hit the snooze. Well, then what happens? Delay. Because then you're looping back to the alarm going off, and then you progress. So that's when you would use that wait or that delay. And we've got an example that I'll show you where we're using some of these. So this is for making cookies, so we can all relate to this. Again, we've got the start, and we've got the stop in the ovals. I don't believe you need to have an extra step that just says start. Just make an oval around your beginning and end steps. They've just done it here. But then there's the document. So we've inserted a recipe. So that's one way that you're using that document step. So you're going along, step, 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 coming back, step, step. So here's your decision point. Here's your question. You can go one of two ways. So you ask the question, is the oven preheated? Yes. Then you continue until you're baking the cookies. Actually, it should say then you eat the cookies. That's where you would stop. But oven preheated, no. So then here's your delay or your bullet, and it's backwards from the way we looked at it on the previous slide. But you're waiting for the oven, and then you go back. Now is it preheated? Yes. Then you bake cookies, and then you're done. So questions? Questions on that? It makes a little bit of sense when you actually see the symbols when they're actually inserted into a flowchart. Okay. So again, what you want to avoid, because you've worked really hard on your process, and so you're wanting to make sure that as you're getting your flowchart documented, that you've avoided things that are inefficient. So if you've got work that looks like it's being done again or duplicative steps, if it's so complex that you have difficult time understanding it, then you're going to want to rework that. One thing you may want to do after you've written your flowchart down is have somebody else look at it. Not only somebody else on your team, but maybe somebody else who's going to be impacted by it. Make sure that they can understand it, and make sure that you're using terms. We're all great at acronyms. Make sure that you're using terms that are very clear and understandable by everyone. You don't want to have a lot of variation. Again, we're trying to make sure that we've improved the process and it's pretty standard. And the handoffs, what you'll see with flowcharts, if you're maybe tracking a document, or maybe you're tracking in environmental public health, someone submits an application for a permit. What you don't really want to see in your process is that it goes to this person, and then it goes to this person, they do something and it goes back to this person, and you're going back and forth. That's not efficient. And the flowchart's really going to show you if you've got that in there. Of course, you don't want a lot of the delays or the waits, and you don't want steps that go nowhere, such as that's what we call dead ends or orphans. So are there questions, or do you feel like from this you'd be able to take your new process and you'd be able to come up with a pretty good flowchart? Yes?
Question about rework loops compared to delay loops. Are there similarities there in terms of resolution? Your example of is the oven preheated or not could take you around multiple times if, for whatever reason, you didn't find the reason it isn't heated.
To me, I'm going to let Stacy go with the terminology because to me, when I'm looking at rework loops, I'm thinking in terms of, you've got a process and you have a document that goes here and somebody's looking at it and then somebody else is looking at it and it's more of a redundant. But I'm sure Stacy has a rework example.
I have such a fun slide that is actually a little quiz, but I don't have it pulled up. But let's use that example. So what if we're making cookies and we have, pull materials, mix, dump it on a pan. I don't know if this is getting at your question, but. And then we have a turn on oven. And then from there, it goes into a decision. Oven hot? Yes. Okay, bake. No. Then what? We wait. So, how could you fix this process and remove this inefficiency?
Turn it on the oven first.
Right? See, we're all brilliant in here. Right. So, you make the first step, turn on oven, which is why most recipes tell that. Is that what you were talking about? Or
Yes, it was addressing the issue because what was shown in the example was sort of you were just looping right back to is it on?
is it on?
As opposed to is there a solution that resolves
You
that?
prevented the rework loop. Because by the time you get here, is it hot? Yep. If it's not, it's probably something wrong with the oven. It's a bigger problem.
So Stacy, jargon alert then.
Jargon
is,
alert. Sorry.
No, that's all right. Is the rework, because I'm looking at it and thinking that I've probably misinterpreted what you meant by, is the rework then always associated with a delay?
No.
Okay. So do you have
Rework
any-
is not, well, so rework, what are the reasons that we have a rework? They cause delays, so
right,
yes.
right.
Yeah.
But versus setting your snooze alarm or waiting for the oven to preheat.
But the way to prevent those delays is to
Build them out.
Build them out of the process.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
What do you mean build them out?
So the way I did it initially, I built an inefficiency right into the process. By simply moving that heating up stage, I removed that whole problem. So I improved the process just by moving a step up.
So building out means that you actually put it in the process so you can see it.
You design a process where, so the rule of thumb, I wish I had time to pull up the slides, but I could show you two processes, and I'd ask you which one takes longer and why. So if you have to have a rework loop, if this is your start, if you have to have a rework loop, the closer you put that rework loop to the start, the better off you are. Because if you do, here's a process, here's a step, here's a step, here's a step, and then you create this rework loop of a decision. I know this is kind of messy, and you work it here. Well, where does this have to go? Maybe you catch an error here, and because it's an error here, it has to go all the way back to the start. So now you have to go back through all this before you hit the same rework loop. So if there is like a quality check that needs to happen, the closer to the start that you make that, the faster the process will run.
So what she did on that one, Amy, is she just changed by building it out, she just, changed the time.
There's different ways to,
Just changed
sometimes
the
we
time
can't.
of when you would do it because it didn't delay the rest of the process.
So think about the graphics layout process. There's just no way that we can't have a rework loop, right? It's just human error, the writing, the grammar, whatever. So rather than wait until the report is all laid out in your graphic design and then having it edited, holy cow, look at everything that's got to change and it's got to go clear back here and run through. We try to make that rework loop here. It's not perfect, we know, but before it gets to you, does that make sense? So sometimes they're inevitable, but then you got to think consciously about where you put that rework loop. Good, not good?
Okay. Other questions on flowcharts? Okay.
So go back to the cookie slide. This is what 3 years of training will do. You know how you improve this process? You just stop it right here because the voice of the customer is the dough's always better, so you just end it. Okay.
Do you need me to do anything over the board? Are you good?
Well, for the exercise.
Okay.
So I'm going to introduce this really quickly. We don't have time to go into it. I just want to make aware that it's there, and we can do some more training on quality counsel for the coaches to help. But this is a basic control plan. So think about how you're going to measure the success of your process moving forward, long-term, forever and ever. So if you recall back to some of the earlier sessions when we talked about what is the voice of the customer, what are the quality aspects that matter to your customer, those are typically also the measures that you're going to want to monitor forever and ever and ever. So typical process measures: Timeliness. Do your customers care about timeliness? You're going to have some measure related to time, number of days to process, number of days to X. It could be an error thing. You don't want an error. Vaccine accountability errors, that might be your process measure, but you have to have some way to measure whether or not that process is working as you've designed it or redesigned it. So you got to think about your measurements, and measurements is a whole training in and of itself, so we're not going to spend a lot of time. It's also helpful to think about how you're going to display that tool, and there's lots of tools that we have not shown you in this class. Maybe next year we will offer some more advanced tools training, but there's a lot of graphs that really illustrate the success of your process over time that are really good to have on hand. So maybe next year we can move towards that. It could be as simple as a trend line, a trend chart for things, histograms. So there's a lot of tools out there. At a minimum, you could just do counts, weekly counts of the number of mistakes or average number of days per week, and just look at it over time. Assign somebody to maintain that. The data's not going to collect itself, right? Somebody has to be responsible for maintaining and collecting that data. Who is it? Who's responsible for acting on it? If there seems to be a problem, whose job is it to say, we got to look at this process again? Somebody's got to take ownership of that. And then always know kind of who the process owner is, because that person has to be involved. That's the person that is really doing the process day in and day out. These people may be the same. They may be different. So logic model is a great place to integrate your control plan on a process. So if you have a bigger programmatic logic model and you've just worked on a sub-process in your bigger program picture, make sure that your measurements that you've uncovered in the course of your QI or QP project are then integrated back into your logic model. So use the methods and tools you already have. So just go back and revise that logic model to make sure you're capturing those measurements. You don't need to have something separate. They can be integrated. Okay, second learning objective. This is the transition piece. So moving away from a project, which is a defined beginning and end, to ongoing daily operations. So we're going to introduce a couple tools. I'm going to move through these really quick because I think they're pretty intuitive, but don't hesitate to ask questions. And they can get a lot more complicated than this, but I'm just giving you really simple ones. So a basic implementation plan. What needs to be done, the task, who's going to be doing it, and when's it going to be due by? So we just had a quality council meeting right before here. Patty Richards came and did an AAR. After action review, which is, in fact, it's a quality improvement cycle. It's the end piece of that. And she had a really great example of every time they finish reviewing an exercise or an event for emergency preparedness and response, they study it, they capture the improvements, and then they assign people and timelines to it to make sure it gets done. That's all this is. So you've just spent 6 months working on a process. You're ready to implement the improvement or implement the new service. It's just an implementation plan. And this is a very simple one for that. Training. You can't expect people to just know what the new process is or the redesign process. So intentionally think about who needs to know what. For HEPA, the policy project that Linda's in charge of that we've been working on, that's coming up. We need to think about a formal training plan for everybody. So we're getting into that stage. But we can't just expect people to use this tool without having any training or background. Very simple. If it's agency-wide, connect with the training team and see what integration might happen there, right? Communication plan, very basic. You can't expect there to be no concerns or resistance. We're talking about a change. Resistance to change is natural. A communication plan is going to support the change process. So who do you need to talk to? Who's your audience? What are the key messages? Typical key messages of your quality project are what was done, why was it done, why was it important? So think about that problem statement that you developed beginning. Who worked on the project? People want to know that, and if you had representation from whatever group that they come from, you're better off, so they know that their voice was probably heard. How did it happen? So those are some key messages. And then how are you going to distribute those messages? Is it Monday mail? Does it need to happen one-on-one? Who's going to do it and when? So pretty basic stuff. So let's talk about change. I want everybody to take out their pen, and you have some sort of paper in front of you. Think about a change experience that you've had in the last 1 to 2 years that you didn't initiate. It was a change initiated by something else, someone else. Think about that and write it down. I'm not going to ask you to share it out. I just want you to be thinking about it. Change kind of put on you, not initiated by you. Everybody think of something? How many people have experienced a change in the last year? Okay. Okay. Now think about how you responded to that. Okay, good or bad, positive or negative. I think each of us has a different personality. We all respond to change a little bit differently. Some people love change. Some people hate it. Partly it's the culture that we're in. If we live in a culture of this is the way that we've always done it, bets are that change is a lot harder as an organization versus if innovation is kind of the culture. But think about how you responded to it, and regardless of if it was a negative or a positive reaction to that change, think about how the change process could have been made easier for you. What would have been done differently that could have helped you? Was it better communication? Was it better understanding of the reason for the change? You know, just think about that. And the whole purpose of doing this is just to get you to think about how there's a whole technical aspect of quality improvement, which is what we've been really focusing on. But the whole point of doing a defined method and following it is that you're also accounting for the people process over time. By engaging in a team, that's actually a change tool to help you. By clearly defining the reasons why you're doing it, that's going to help you make the change. So the beauty of the quality method is that there's a technical way to follow it, but it's also helping you lead people along, because in the end, it's people that matter and that people that are going to be doing the services. So this is a change management process. Change management is a whole class of in itself, so I'm not going to go into depth. I just want people thinking about whatever you're doing is creating a change for somebody, and how can you be sensitive to that change. So here's a way that you can manage change.
We are Borg. You will be assimilated.
I am Locutus of Borg. Resistance is futile. Your life, as it has been, is over. From this time forward, you will service us.
You will be assimilated.
Resistance is futile.
We are the Borg. Lower your shield and surrender your ships. We will add your biological and technological distinctiveness to our own. Your culture will adapt to service us. Resistance is futile.
So that's one approach to change management. Resistance is futile. You will be assimilated, right? How many think that's a little bit heavy-handed? Okay. So might we resist that a little bit? That would be a little bit uncomfortable. So we just, lighten this up with that. But instead, think about what you wrote down. Like, if anybody wants to share without sharing details of your change, if anybody wants to offer a suggestion of what might have helped in that change process, throw it up. But some of that is defining the change. That's why we go through the define stage of quality improvement. We're really defining the problem, and we're defining why it's important. Determining the stakeholders so you can involve them. That's part of the change process. Determining key messages and communication strategies. That's part of change management. It's also part of the QI method. Implementation of the communication plan. Intentionally identifying and thinking about resistance, because to some degree, all of us will resist change. It's not comfortable. For most people, in some level, it's just not comfortable. And then we deliberately manage that change by taking action on it. Anybody want to offer something? Cindy?
The end of CTG funding.
Okay. Was a hard thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ending a grant 2 years early from what we expected brought all kinds of different change and expectations.
Right.
It redefined the work for the next 7 months. It impacted staffing levels. It impacted how we thought about our work.
Mm-hmm. Huge.
Yeah.
Okay. For my what?
They won't be able to,
Oh, my YouTube viewers, our YouTube. So Cindy was talking about a major change that her and her team went through. CTG funding coming to an abrupt end earlier than anticipated, and all the impacts that that had, financial, emotional, I imagine. Yeah, so it's a great example. I had something very similar with Centers for Excellence. Funding, CDC pulled funding a year early. It's like, hello, that's 60% of my funding for my position. So you can imagine how I felt with that. Like, you know, it was challenging.
I think that in any situation when change is kind of forced against you or something's happened, you know, a lot of us ask why.
Mm-hmm.
You know, why? Why is this going to be this new way? And I think, you know, each one of us has processes that we own and can know how that we're doing our job and think that we're doing it the best way that we're possibly can do it. And then when there's change, I think you ask that, why? You know, I think that the communication is really important.
It's really important.
That change process. And understand, make sure that folks know why the change is important. I'm thinking of an example where the city came to my house and started digging up my front yard. I had no clue of what was going on, right? I went out there and started talking to them like, oh yeah, we're digging up this, you know, drain for these other houses next door. And I'm like, why? You know, what's the problem? You know, where's the communication? You know, did you think of asking me that before you started digging up my yard? You know, and all these other kind of questions. So I think, you know, communication ahead of change is something that's really important. To get buy-in, to get feedback, to understand the why and the reason.
So I'm hearing communication, but also involving him in the conversation. So again, it goes back to people will support what they help build or even consulted on. It's a great example. So that's going to lead us to an exercise. That clock is fast, right? Yeah. So we're going to do, this is an easy breezy change management tool that we're going to do. It's called force field analysis. And it's a way to intentionally think about forces that are in support of the change and forces that are against the change. And it forces a team to think about the different weights of those changes and then deliberately set out an action plan to address them. So it's really not that difficult of a tool, and there's a template that we'll also post that you can use if you wanted to do it electronically with the team. So here's the basic steps, and we're going to do this right now. So what I'd ask is somebody in this class to volunteer a change opportunity they're working on, preferably in relation to the project they're working on. So is anybody at the point of wanting to actually implement a solution or a change? Anybody want to volunteer that? Okay. You want to do HEPA?
We can do HEPA.
Okay. So Linda's volunteering her project. Okay, so what is the solution you want to implement? Or what is the desired state?
The desired state is use of the HEPA processing tool. Does that work for you?
Can you tell everybody what HEPA is?
Health and equity policy analysis, and so it's a process and tools for having a very systematic approach to analyzing policies for health and equity.
Okay. In brief, everybody get that? In brief, what's the problem that this solution is intended to address?
Unintended consequences as a result of implementing policies.
Of implementing policy in a non-standard, non-defined way, right? Okay. So this is the solution. This is the ideal state. Everybody uses HEPA process and tool as it's appropriate. We could make this a little bit more wordy. So let's brainstorm forces for that change. Why should we as an agency have a defined process, health and equity policy analysis process, and tool set to do that? Why would that be important? What is driving that change?
Currently overlooked. Issues of equity.
Equity is overlooked?
Or when you want to look at it, there's no formal process to do so.
Nobody knows the process?
Yeah.
Is it inefficient?
It didn't exist. Yeah.
And it gives you an easy tool to use to make it happen.
Consistency? Standardization, so people know what to expect? Pardon my handwriting.
It can also be used to increase awareness. Just implementing the tool can help increase awareness of the user.
Increase awareness of what?
Health inequity.
Okay.
It also helps in sort of the education about health in all policies, social determinants of health.
Okay.
Does it also allow for opportunity to identify roadblocks or areas of?
Yes. And I'll stop that because I'm running out of room, but yes. Yeah. Lends importance to health, or would you say?
Health in all policies.
Health.
Education. It helps with that.
And all policy education, okay. And the last one you said, Ellie?
Opportunities for
leveraging? Or the opposite?
Well, just if you have 3 different programs where you're trying to implement a policy, but it's all related to the same
alignment.
kind of idea, alignment.
Okay. Okay. So now let's talk about what are the forces that are against this change. So the problem, unintended consequences of having a unstandard, no really policy process. Our solution is that we want to design a process and tool. Okay, so what would be the forces against this?
Resistance to some changing in roles and responsibilities among staff.
Okay, what else?
I'm thinking if we're looking at jurisdictional type policies, additional work that need to be done from partners. When they already have so many things to do.
Political misalignment.
That's a good way to put it.
The process and the tools aren't built correctly or efficiently or something.
But we followed a quality planning process. So tools in reality might not be that simple.
How about time and resources to do the work?
Potential for not being inclusive of all determinants. I'm not saying that's the key.
Okay, and then I'm going to stop there for the sake of time. Okay. Okay, so this is a very simple tool. I'm showing you the most simple. This can get a lot more complicated by going through and assigning relative values or weights to it. It's like, we think this one's really important, +3, this one's not so much. So you can actually assign numbers to it to give them more level of importance. You could use this in combination with a prioritization matrix or just consensus. So you can make it more complicated. For the sake of simplicity, though, you can use it just like this. And it's just a structured brainstorming tool. Because look at, in 5 minutes of time, what we came up with quickly, right? And so then with your team, you'd use this in the most simple with consensus process. So going through as a team and saying, okay, guys, which ones of these can we reinforce? Like, these are all positive forces for change, so let's really boost them. And how do we do that? And then you go through and say, okay, which ones of these can we remove? And by eliminating the resistance, then it's going to make these good changes happen easier. And the rule of thumb, believe it or not, is that there's generally more bang for the buck if you can remove barriers than it is for pushing this. So why is that? So how many people in here have been a teenager? Oh, everybody. Okay.
How many people are still?
How many people are still adolescents? Okay. So think about as a teenager, kind of what you went through if your parents were like, you need to do this, you need to do this, you got to do this. You got to have a process, you got to do this, we got to do this. And what is your immediate natural human response? I'm going to push back. You know, as a teenager, you're going to push back. To some extent, we still have a tendency to do this. So just pushing the positives isn't always the best approach. It's easier sometimes to remove barriers. So think about healthy eating. Health education message. I know I need to eat healthy. I do. I know. But if you just keep telling me that, you ain't gonna do anything. But remove my barriers to eating healthy, and we might get me somewhere, you know. We good? Does this seem pretty easy? So from there, you would pick out, you know, key things. Easy to use. Increase awareness. What did we do, Kyle, Linda, to address some of these?
Talk to the customer.
We talked to the customers to make it easy to use. What do we do here?
Communication plan for rolling it out.
Communicate, yeah, okay. So what are some of the things that we're mitigating here?
Well, you tested the tool, so
hopefully we got rid of that one.
We tested the tool. We think it's pretty simple, right? How are we addressing time and resources to do the work?
What do you mean?
It's a barrier. Are we asking everybody in the agency to do this? Who are we asking to do this?
Small group.
A small group, a team.
And because we've made it so simple and easy and quick.
So as a team, we went through and systematically thought through this. I'm not to say we missed things. We still haven't rolled this out widespread. Things are going to come up. But intentionally, we did think about it as a team. So this is a tool that you can use in your daily work, too, to think about a change you're trying to implement with partners, with staff, with yourself. Okay. How many people think they can use this? Okay. About half the room. Okay. Okay. So we are pretty much done on time. This is the tool we've taught today. Try it out. You can make it a lot more complicated. Google it, and you can look at some different things. I'm going to show you a template that I think is pretty snazzy. Didn't even have to build it. It was right there. So this is a force-filled worksheet. So you can see here, you can just type in a change, assign a score, put the proposal in the middle. It's pretty slick. So this is already, or we will post this after the training, and you have a nice, easy-to-use tool. Okay. So the whole point of going through this as a collaborative is so that we can learn together, so we can hear what each other are doing in our projects, so we can share examples and tools. So this end session, which is in December, is really intended to turn the mic over to you all and for you guys to provide instruction and sharing in a really informal manner to the rest of the group. And there's going to be a lot of value in that. So we want to make this really low key. If it was a formal learning Congress, which is what we called it through centers, everybody had to present their project pretty formally. We're not doing that to y'all. The intention is that we're going to have a roving MC. Mr. Eric Myers is going to kind of MC that, and we're just going to take turns kind of talking about our projects, asking you to talk about your projects, what you learned, what went well, what different. And to help with that, we've prepared a template for you to use as a slide set to prompt you. You don't have to come up here and present it. We'll pull it up for you, and you can just sit where you're at and kind of talk through it. So, where are we at? If you go to the internet, can everybody get on the internet? I hope. If you go to committees and drop down to quality council, you're going to pull up this page, okay? And then go to the learning co-op, which I've done. You can see it pulled up here. And at the very bottom is a learning co-op share out slide template. You see it at the bottom? Click on that. And there's a PowerPoint presentation you can preload. And the intention is if you want to do something different, do it different. We're not trying to force anybody to do it this way. We just want to make this really easy. So it's a handful of slides. What is your project? What is your project? Who is on your team, if anybody? You might be a one-person team. That's fine. You can put a picture of yourself, maybe. What about your project do you want to share? Provide some background, problem, opportunity statement, describe it a little bit. What's the status of your project? So we know not everybody's completed it, but just provide a status report of where you're at. Think about the phases that we've gone through. So talk a little bit about that. Maybe talk about where you're heading next. Talk about your key learnings. Was there anything that was like, oh my gosh, that was so valuable learning, hard or good or bad or ugly? What do you want to share to the group? And then what's been your favorite tool to learn? So we've been getting a lot of feedback on the evaluations. People are really picking up on some tools, and I've seen a lot of excitement. Which one appealed to you? How do you think you can use it? In your hobby, at home, would maybe be a funny thing to do, or in your project or in your work, but just kind of share that out. So this is intended to make it easy for you, give you some examples. Coaches are going to work with you to make sure that these are loaded, and then we're going to take turns, division by division, just doing some share out. Questions, concerns? Helene?
So I see there's 6 slides, so are you thinking about 5 minutes?
Maximum.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there are a lot of projects, so we're going to break it up. So it's not just going to be, we will be 2 hours. So
next session, 2 hours.
Next session, we're going to run the full 2 hours, which should be blocked out already for everybody. And we're going to break it up so that we're not just sitting here for 2 hours listening to projects. And one of our biggest critiques, I think, has been lack of coffee and other refreshments. So we will be providing coffee, etc.
And snacks.
So we'll make this better. We'll have some other things as well. So again, this will be low key. The coaches will work with you. We'll get everything preloaded. So it's just sit where you are and just talk through a couple slides, and then we'll pass the mic along. So it'll be pretty low key, pretty informal, pretty comfortable.
So we're hoping this will give all of us a lot of exposure to some different things going on in the agency, but also maybe some tools that get shared. Might spark some interest and some additional conversations that happen. Donna?
Do you have a deadline when you want things preloaded?
Amy, do you?
Week in advance.
Maybe like the day before, or
Just give it a little bit more time. How about the Monday before the learning co-op? So, whoops. That's wrong, isn't it? The learning co-op is?
When is it, December 11th?
December 11th?
I think, isn't that the second Thursday? Okay, yeah, December 11th.
So can we try to have those to Amy by end of day Monday before, which would be the 8th. 8th.
That one looks like 1 hour.
We'll send out a reminder, a link to the template we'll send out, and we'll clarify the 2 hours and everything so that you guys have it.
My rework loop was towards the end of my process, Cindy.
Okay, and to get your certificate, you must come to the share out. So you can't go through this whole thing and then just bail on the share out.